I grabbed her, pulled her into the back of the van. And then she fought. She bit me hard, drew blood.
Do you use any kind of tourniquet on her, Tony? I mean,
Same thing.
What's what? I remember.
I don't recall. I just remember it was a yellow rope.
He got the thrill from watching his victims die. He had the control. He was, in his mind, godlike. He could grant life or grant death.
I felt like it was only a matter of time before the next body would show up.
Anthony Shore is about as smart as a serial killer is, as I've seen in 30+ years of criminal justice. You hate to say he is diabolically brilliant.
As detectives in Houston attend the latest discovery of a body, the relentlessness of the assassin's merciless handiwork begins to defy belief. The question arises, what could possibly be going on inside the mind of a serial killer?
She fought like hell.
Serial killers have a desire to kill. They have a thirst to kill.
Early one Houston morning, on her way to a school for troubled youngsters, fate introduced teenager Lori Lee Trembley to a man she was ill-equipped to deal with. He had driven past her before, spotted that she was often alone at a bus stop. Anthony Shore recalls that day as particularly memorable. The married father of two was a self-styled guy-next-door ordinary Joe, but he would reveal himself in recordings that we've obtained as a boy who girls would be uncomfortable with, a teenager who groped, and an adult who would kill and kill again.
Let's start with, at the start, just tell me.
First is Lori Trembley.
14 years old. Lori's 14 years old. I mean, think about your children who are 14 years old. I mean, it's unfathomable what happened to her. And she was just the first.
Lori Trembley, Tony Shore's first, as he calls her. By his version of events, she comes on to him.
One morning, this girl comes up and asks me for a cigarette while I was at the stoplight. I asked if she needed a ride, and I gave her a ride. And a couple days went by. She saw me. I gave her a ride again to school.
To school. The man claiming it was Lori Lee who was leading the 25-year-old Shore into a relationship knew she was at school.
She and I became more than friends.
He's trying very hard to make something that is very dark and sinister normal.
She and I became involved just in the sense of kissing and, hello, goodbyes. I started giving her a ride on a semi-regular basis.
He's trying to normalize the idea that he would pick up somebody else's child in the car, drive around with her, and that naturally one thing would lead to another.
Lori is tall for her age, precocious, playing at appearing like a young woman, but focused on catching the 0641 bus every day and getting to class on time.
Lori was walking to school, doing what thousands and millions of youngsters do every day. And here comes this predator.
Shore targeted them because of their vulnerability.
And one day it was misting rain. She saw me, asked me for a ride, and I wanted to get more involved in just the kissing and stuff. And it started off okay, and then she freaked out and said, "No, this ain't going anywhere. Let me out," threatened to tell on me.
There's something that really speaks to his need to be understood, this need to kind of rationalize and normalize and get the listener on his side. So even here, you're beginning to see those traits of narcissism, those traits of, you know, I can get you on my side, I can make you understand what happened, I can make you understand the stuff that is so unbelievably not understandable.
Shaw was married with 2 daughters, had a steady job, a nice home. He had a life. He had a lot to lose.
And what happened?
I undid her bra. Everything got out of hand. She freaked out, and we got into a fight. I tried to knock her out because I just really freaked out.
Shaw reached into the back of the vehicle for a cord that he'd left there.
I think the incident with little Lori Lee really speaks to the premeditation and the boldness of this act. You know, he tries to make it out like, well, the cord just happened to be there. He knew this was something that he wanted to do. He places the cord in the car, ready for use.
I took this cotton cord and I tried to make sure that she would never, ever tell anybody, even though I knew that was insane, and I strangled her.
He got the thrill from watching his victims die. He had the control. He was, in his mind, godlike. He could grant life or grant death.
He had not perfected his method of killing yet, but according to homicide hunter Brian Harris, a 21-year Texas detective, part of the Tony Shaw modus operandi had been established. He killed with his bare hands.
The most personal way to kill somebody is to strangle them. It was personal and close, and so he was able to watch and literally watch the breath of life come out of that person.
Psychologist Dr. Linda Papadopoulos has been investigating the underlying symptoms and causes of Anthony Shaw's behavior. Her analysis is through the prism of his deeds. She's also had the benefit of hearing his story in his own recorded words, unearthed by this program.
When you think about the horror of witnessing a death, let alone being the cause of a slow death, you know, most human beings aren't capable of doing that, let alone taking enjoyment out of that, let alone focusing on what it means for them. You know, I kind of had to do it.
It's not right. I'm not justifying it. It's hard to talk about.
But hearing him say that, you know, this is hard to talk about, makes you think, again, who is he thinking of? This is about him. He's talking about taking the life of a child, and yet it's turned on, oh, this process is difficult for me. It's all about him. And I think this ability to detach, this complete and utter lack of empathy, doesn't just speak to the horror of what he did, but the potential of what he might do in future.
The murder of Lori Lee Trembley began just before daybreak. It's likely that she'd been snatched, assaulted, and killed in less than an hour. Her killer now had to dispose of the body. He drove to a nearby parking area behind a Mexican restaurant. Anthony Shaw had strangled Lori Lee to death. Having dumped her body, he went back to work as a phone repairman and later that night played piano at a local jazz club where he was known as Tony, the telephone man. This is his music. In his mind, the mistake he had made was to hurt himself.
Anthony Shaw, with Lori, used his fingers to strangle her, and he realized that his finger got hurt. When he was trying to strangle her, his finger got hurt, and so it was a learned behavior. He said, you know what, next time, I'm not going to have my finger in that position where it can hurt.
Shaw would devise a way to ensure his fingers would not be hurt. His method would one day earn him the mantle of the Turniquent Killer. For now, he was not a suspect in the murder of Lori Lee Trembley. He was free to kill again. In the late 80s, Anthony Shaw was working as a telephone repairman for Southwestern Bell in Houston. Married, he had 2 children and styled himself as Mr. Reliable, good-looking, a good neighbor, good company. But he was deft at deceit.
There's so many people coming out of the woodwork, particularly there's some people that contacted me that worked for the phone company who were just astonished, and they were dumbfounded. They said, I worked with him. I know him. I went to lunch with Anthony. Sure. I can't believe that's him. He was so nice, such a normal guy.
There were large gaps in time where nobody knows what Anthony Shaw was doing. Even his wife didn't know, or his family.
That's what makes serial killers so difficult to capture. That's what makes serial killers so difficult to recognize, because they're your next door neighbors, they're your coworkers.
One of the things that makes Shaw so dangerous was that he really was the guy next door. And it's that cliche when you find out, you know, the horror, and you hear everyone say, but really, like this is the Tony the telephone guy.
Shaw was, I think, a master of lying and secrets and disguises and things that covered his trail.
But if the truth of Shaw's past had been known to anyone in authority, he would have been a suspect in the murder of Lori Lee.
His sisters speak about the fact that he was sexually inappropriate and indeed sexually aggressive with their friends. So he would touch them when they didn't want to be touched. He would try and make them feel uncomfortable.
He was a groper. Sometimes it could start off as simple as somebody in an elevator and they like the fact that they can bump up against a stranger and get away with it. Anthony was that kind of person. He would bump up against people, he would grope people and see how he could get away with it.
In his mind, there wasn't a woman that was exempt from sexual harassment. If he was in an elevator and he was aroused, he'd sexually harass the woman in the elevator. If he was at home and his sister brought home a friend, he would sexually harass the friend. You know, there was such a sense of entitlement over the way that he saw women. He engaged with them as objects to be used for his sexual satisfaction.
Years followed the murder of Lori Lee Trembley without a breakthrough. In 1992, Shaw's habit was to drive through a part of Houston every day which saw him pass a girl at a bus stop. She was 21-year-old Carmen Maria de Estrada. Some called her Maria, others Carmen.
And I ran across this really, I thought, beautiful young lady, and I offered her a ride. And she turned me down. Said she was on my way to work every morning.
Out of all the victims, one of the more interesting stories of Anthony Shaw is what he believes was a relationship with Carmen. He describes Carmen as somebody that came to him, that wanted him, that this was a willing relationship.
She was going places. She was talking about, yeah, she wanted to go out.
In his own mind, Anthony Shaw, for whatever reason, really had an affinity for Carmen. Carmen was his pet. Carmen was his prize. And he liked Carmen, so therefore he didn't refer to her the way he did the other victims.
I think what's particularly dangerous about Anthony Shore was the fact that he constructed these narratives in his mind that fed into this fantasy world. So with Carmen, he believes that they're in a real relationship.
When Anthony Shore discusses Carmen, he seems to revel in the fact that Carmen wanted him. That this wasn't a case of him having to abduct any kind of woman or force Carmen to be with him. That he had this physical proudness that she came to him.
So her need to kind of keep him at bay and say no doesn't really mean no in his mind. In his mind, it means, well, just wait. I really want this, but maybe not now. So any attempt by a young woman to reject him, to put down parameters, is kind of met with complete disregard. She's beautiful, he wants her, well, that's it. He'll have her, even if he needs to completely violate her and potentially even kill her.
She was, again, you know, a hard worker, trying to help her family, you know, just taking public transportation to and from her work and just helping her family just go about life. And here she was again, vulnerable, by herself, no one else around. And here comes Anthony Shore again, seizing that opportunity.
Shore does not feel Carmen's fear. He understands only his perception of events, consoles himself that this is a romantic liaison.
I remember I opened her blouse and she was resisting. So then I had this sick consumption that I was going to have her regardless. I wanted to possess her somehow. And my intention was to have sex with her initially, and that wasn't happening. She became real violent, just fighting, wanting to get out of the car.
He begins to fear that, hold on a second, she's going to tell on me.
Shore knows all too well what the reality now is. A woman he attacks is trying to break free. He reacts the same way that he had years earlier with Lori Lee.
Abducts her, rapes her, kills her in excruciating slow fashion, and then dumps her.
And he speaks about this as if he has no choice, as if his safety obviously trumps any need for her to have a life, to grow up, to get married, to breathe.
I remember I had a pair of shears, and she had on black shorts. I took them off. And her pantyhose, but I didn't cut her panties. I don't know why.
It's like he's relaying a run-of-the-mill event. It's like he's relaying what happened on the way to work, you know, as if he kind of accidentally stepped into a puddle.
It got out of hand, and she freaked out, and I knew this was not. This was going to be real bad. So I panicked.
And this is truly telling of his lack of empathy, even though he tries to use words like, oh, you know, it was horrible, it shouldn't have happened. There's very little true empathy there.
It started to become daylight. So to avoid discovery, again, I strangled her.
In the case of Lori Lee, Shore had hurt his fingers when attacking her. With Carmen Estrada, he used a weapon, one which still enabled him to slowly squeeze the life out of her.
So what does he do? He gets a tourniquet. And it becomes his signature card, his calling card, and he gets good at it. And with that tourniquet, with every twist, he can tighten it and watch them start to die, loosen it, give them a gasp of air.
The tourniquet takes your fingers off the pulse, literally, but it gave Shore the ability to turn life on and off by controlling the airflow of the victim. And it heightens the anxiety and pain and fear of the suffering victim.
Shaw has never been one to avoid the limelight. Some believe his choice of weapon was a means of gaining notoriety.
I can't say for sure, but I think in Anthony Shaw's mind, he was probably thinking, what will separate me from other serial killers that no one else has done? Aha, I can strangle my victims to death with a handmade tourniquet, and hence you get branded as the Turniquent Killer, a name that stuck with him throughout his criminal career.
He seemed to take pride, a sick kind of pride in his killing and in his technique with the tourniquet. It worked for him. It was his signature.
He's able to really enjoy the killing. He ensures that she dies slowly. He ensures that she dies on his terms. The horror of this is completely lost on him.
Shaw is not the typical low-functioning, one bad crime defendant. He was a calculated, thinking, predatory killer.
The discovery of Carmen Maria de Estrada's body did yield a piece of evidence which would one day prove crucial in the case against Anthony Shaw.
DNA was found underneath her fingernails.
The problem was, it was early days in DNA technology. And what sample detectives had did not match any on the Texas database. The murder of Carmen was not linked to that of Lori Lee. Lori hadn't been raped. Carmen was. Lori had been strangled whilst Shaw had used a tourniquet to kill Carmen. Different MOs. And there were 6 years between the crimes. 18 months after the murder of Carmen Estrada, Shaw was still working in plain sight of those that he targeted. No young woman was safe in Houston.
Well, here's a guy that worked for the phone company, telephone company, Southwestern Bell, as a repairman. I mean, that gives him access to, you know, so many different parts of town where you can basically spy on so many different people throughout the day.
He had access to every neighborhood in Houston. He had a reason to be there. He had a marked vehicle. It made it totally easy for him to just look for victims.
In October the following year, 18 months after Shaw had killed Carmen, he spotted a girl coming and going from a house.
I'm guessing she was probably 16, 17 at the time. I'm not really sure how old. The
victim was a young person whose house he surveilled for several days.
She was young, she was attractive, and I was a phone man working outdoors, outside plant. And I worked down this street several times. I'd seen her coming home. I knew that she was a latchkey kid coming home from high school or whatever school she was going to.
To me, this is so methodically calculated on his part as to how he picked his victims, and then, of course, what he did to his victims afterward. This was not some spontaneous spur of the moment. This was somebody who was so devious and so cunning in nature.
Having broken into the house where the teenage girl lived, he waited until she returned from school. She entered. He pounced.
Told her it was a burglary, got her cooperation, and tied her up with electrical cord and raped her.
The young lady fought the way Lori Lee and Carmen had. Shaw had killed them. Would he let his latest victim survive? Bound with duct tape, threatened with a knife, the latest victim of Anthony Shaw does not become his third murder victim. As he strangled her, he claims to have realized the wrong that he'd done.
Well, and I thought, no, I just can't. I just need to get out of here. And I left. Thank God.
But you didn't strangle her at all, or you started to?
I started to, and I stopped.
He speaks about it in the same way that you'd speak about trying to, I don't know, to quit smoking. It's not a big deal, you know. It's a behavior I'd like to stop, and you know, it's an addiction that'd be really nice if I kind of stopped. Again, this isn't a person. This is a thing to be used, and if I could just use it in a different way, then I'd be better. So there's no sense of the impact this would have had on this young woman. There's no sense of the pathology behind, you know, wrapping her up in duct tape, letting her suffer all that. You know, he sees this as a great win for himself because, hey, I didn't kill this one.
He considered it an accomplishment to be able to rape women without murdering them.
It was around noon in August, a year after Shaw had raped but not killed a teenage girl, that 9-year-old Diana Rabbola left her home. She was the same age as Shaw's youngest daughter. Diana's errand that day was to fetch sugar for the family to sweeten their homemade watermelon drinks.
Her mom simply sent her a block away to go to the store.
We're not talking about someone walking, you know, in the dark, after hours. We're talking about the middle of the day in a neighborhood. We're not talking about some isolated area where there's no, this is a populated part of the town. That's pretty brazen.
Shaw shows no pity as he recounts events that day, complaining that his victim had shown tenacity in defending herself.
She fought like hell. Strangely, she fought like hell.
She was sexually tortured and just dumped like the rest of them.
Just wouldn't go along with anything. And she was so afraid.
You know, someone that can do that to a 9-year-old girl without any care in the world and just leave her out there just to rot. It's about the lowest of the low you could possibly imagine of a life form in this universe.
And she fought and fought. And I don't recall what type of cord or strand or piece of wire or something. And I did the same thing.
But if you look at Diana, he's got to explain why he chose her. So he talks about being the nice guy, that he always gave her little rides here and there, and that's why she would just hop in with him. Couldn't be farthest from the truth. Her mother didn't raise her that way. And Anthony Shore couldn't even give the family the dignity that they raised their daughter better than to just constantly hop in a car with a grown man. This was Anthony Shore taking advantage of a 9-year-old girl that he had no explanation on why he would snatch her off the street.
Shaw had now killed 3 times, but was still not a suspect. The murder of Diana Rabbola was a turning point of sorts in the Shaw storyline. Publicly, Houston police did not admit they had a serial killer in their midst, but privately, they did.
As a young line prosecutor, I worked in the Special Crimes Division of the Harris County District Attorney's Office, which I now lead. And pre-DNA, 1992 through 1994, when it was very uncommon for it to be tested, there were a series of crimes involving a signature mark, a tourniquet, left on the bodies. And 2 of those cases came across my desk. They were brought by homicide investigators who were working the cases, trying to figure out the whodunit.
The police were now looking at those on the registered sex offender list, but Shaw wasn't on that list. In 1995, a girl went missing in Houston. Her name, Donna Sanchez.
Last and final case, Donna Sanchez.
Middle of the day, minding her own business, not doing anything wrong, not doing anything illegal, just doing what teenage girls do, you know? And again, the one common denominator all 4 of his victims had, besides being young, were they were by themselves. And little did they know that how vulnerable that made them to a sadistic predator like Anthony Shore.
I was driving around. I saw this girl I want to say she was wearing white coveralls and a striped shirt underneath.
Dana goes to make a phone call. In the days of telephone booths, she's just going to make a phone call. What a perfect victim for Anthony Shore. He's the phone man. He's the guy that's there. And she's outside, and she just wants to get a ride.
And she was mad. She had this look that she was angry and upset, and she was at a payphone.
She needs a quick ride, and here's somebody that perhaps she's seen in the neighborhood before. She's seen certainly repairman. This guy's doesn't look like much of a threat. I mean, my goodness, he must be at work. So she's very trusting. And that's one thing Anthony Shore made note of, that all the victims were very trusting, and Dana trusted him for a ride.
One night I just said, hey, would you like a ride? She says, man, I'm going to see my boyfriend somewhere. I forget where she told me. I said, no problem. And jumped right in. And we went driving. And then we had conversation.
As with others he had chosen, Dana was Hispanic in appearance, slight of build.
Anthony Shore chose his victims primarily based on their size, of course. All of them were small in stature, thin.
I was flirting with her heavily. That time I had really long hair. I thought I looked good. Maybe I just looked like a freak. I don't know. But she was real friendly, you know, talking about, I think she said she was a runaway.
If you go and look at someone like Shore, how many countless hours he must have just roamed around. I mean, I can't imagine this being spontaneous. I mean, to me, this is so methodically calculated on his part as to how he picked his victims, and then, of course, what he did to his victims afterward. This was not some spontaneous spur of the moment.
In fact, despite his claims, it's all but certain that Dana resisted Shore from the moment that he approached her.
She was joking like, no, I got a boyfriend and this and that. So I grabbed her, pulled her into the back of the van. And then she fought. She bit me hard, drew blood, I forget, from my chest, I want to say. Mm-hmm. So I restrained her, tied her hands.
Twice.
I want to say duct tape. I don't remember for sure, but I think duct tape. I remember that I taped her
Right.
face. And she was fighting so hard. I knew there was nothing I could do to get out of this. And I used the ligature.
Shore drove to a deserted area nearby and dumped Dana's body in scrubland, his signature tourniquet abandoned by her body.
I didn't throw in a dumpster this time. I drove around somewhere away.
Dana was reported missing by her friends. Days turned into weeks and still no sign of her. Police needed a break, and they got one via a telephone tips hotline. They could not have known it, but it was Anthony Shore himself who made the call. There are those who believe he wanted the notoriety.
So he has the audacity to contact a local news station and tip them off as to where the body could be found, just so he can make sure that he got credit for the latest murder in his own mind. That's mine. You can actually visualize him at home in front of the television, waiting for the local news to capture the story of what he did, and him just salivating, going, "Yep, that's another one of mine."
At the time, there was no match to the DNA found on police records.
So you have this great DNA evidence from this body in a field that you can't compare it to anything because there's nothing in the system to compare it to.
Around this time, Houston police did arrest Anthony Shaw, 7 months after Sanchez's murder. But he stayed cool. It was a misdemeanor arrest. An undercover officer posing as a prostitute randomly offered Shaw sex for a fee, and he accepted. He was given 3 months unsupervised probation and a $122 fine. No DNA sample was taken. It would take another heinous offense for Houston police to get their man. Over the decades that Shaw would spend talking to police, he aged, losing the long hair he thought had made him look so good. By 1997, Shaw had remarried. His mother and sister looked after his 2 daughters, but his readiness to terrorize women and young girls never left him.
All of a sudden, Anthony Shaw does another despicable act when he sexually abuses and assaults his 2 young daughters.
Because the laws had changed and DNA samples could and were taken from individuals charged with certain crimes, a law that didn't exist back in 1992 or 1994 when I investigated those other cases. Because of that, his sample was entered into CODIS, the national system for matching DNA to known individuals or unknown individuals.
Shaw would eventually plead guilty to child molestation. He did not go to prison.
He's arrested, convicted, put on probation like many sex offenders are, particularly on your first offense, so that's not a surprise. He was put on probation. But the catch was, and this led to his downfall, he had to submit DNA as a result of now being a convicted sex offender.
And when his sample was entered into the CODIS database, it matched the old capital murders.
In almost a strange, cathartic way, his daughters ends up solving the murders of the 4 young girls, because if he hadn't committed those atrocities, the abuses on his daughter, who knows how long, who knows if it would have ever been solved. It's hard to say. So in a strange way, his family became his downfall.
But it didn't happen overnight. Because of administrative failures, it took 6 years from the arrest of Shaw for sexually molesting his daughters to match his DNA to that found under the fingernails of Carmen Estrada. 11 hours into his police interview, he confessed. In 2004, now showing the signs of being an older man, Shaw was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection for his role in the killing of Carmen Maria de Estrada while in the course of committing aggravated sexual assault. Shaw also confessed to the murders of Lori Lee Trembley, Donna Rabbola and Donna Sanchez, as well as the aggravated sexual assault of a 14-year-old student. Shaw asked for and received the death penalty. Not that his story was even remotely over.
He's the only inmate whose case I've reviewed where his own family asked that he be executed. His sister, his children, it says a lot about him.
But during his years on death row, Shaw embarked on a game of cat and mouse with the authorities by hinting at other crimes he may have committed, so forcing them to open cold case files.
He confessed to a number of alleged rapes that he said he committed on women that he met in social settings or bars where he would slip them Rohypnol, the date rape drug, take them to his van, rape them, sometimes sell them to others, and then deliver them back, supposedly without them knowing what had happened to them. You know, it's hard to know what to believe from a serial killer, but It's easy to imagine other victims because Shore was prolific, but he was calculated.
Anthony Shore was still on death row at the beginning of 2018, 14 years after he was sentenced. At the start of the year, his time looked to be up. Kim Ogg is the district attorney who pursued the death sentence in the case of Tony Shore. She's known to be reticent in the use of capital punishment.
Well, when the government exercises the greatest power it has, which is to kill a citizen, it always has to be taken with great care. It's the most serious act our government commits.
What was it then that made even those slow to see the use of the ultimate state penalty like Kim Ogg to pursue the execution of Anthony Shore?
I thought that we would always be in danger from Anthony Shore, and taking a look at his victims in the waiting room with them before the execution. These were broken people, and I think the future dangerousness is that every breath that man took caused those families pain, including his own family, who testified and told the media they wanted him dead.
Shore even claimed to have murdered a man for whom another prisoner on death row had already been convicted. His story wasn't true. He claimed other rapes. The seriousness of those claims kept him alive for another 90 days as investigations were launched.
And he got a 90-day reprieve in order to look at all the, quote, offenses he was claiming credit to, just to make sure and determine that he indeed didn't commit any further murders and rapes.
Finally, Shore's game of claiming crimes to his name to avoid execution ended. He was put to death by lethal injection on January the 18th, 2018.
Anthony Shore's the worst of the worst. Serial murderer, torturer, enjoyer of other people's pain and suffering, murderer of little children and women, the kind of guy who we can never be safe enough from.
Every time I tell myself, I just kept saying, man, this gotta stop. I'm a sick puppy.
He was the serial killer who could sail from a port undetected, who could arrive at another city unsuspected, able to target another victim. A serial killer who's a moving target can be hard to find. Was that serial killer Richard Doro?
Part of the inquiry was to monitor where Doro had been throughout his service in the Navy.
Doro's career as a naval seaman allowed him to travel from port to port.
As a sailor, he was in Perth one day, the following week he was in Sydney, the following month he was in New Zealand.
And he became almost ghost-like. He was elusive. He was a stranger in every town that he visited.
And in every town he was capable of killing before moving on. Until he settled in a suburb of Perth, Western Australia, where Richard Doro saw the light.
He found religion, we think, joining the Jehovah's Witnesses.
By then, Richard Doro was hiding a lot of secrets. He would one day deliver a note which revealed some of his ugly truths. But to this day, the full truth is still to be uncovered as investigators try to get inside the mind of a serial killer. The sea is sometimes slow to give up its secrets. The tragic stories it's witnessed remain untold. Locked deep beneath its waves, the truth can be kept prisoner. When Richard Doro sat down to carefully choose what would be his final words, he revealed only so much of his days as a sailor in the Australian Navy. But he wrote enough to torture those left behind, those who would wonder till they die what happened to loved ones whose lives had been ended, probably, but not certainly, by Richard Doro.
He commits suicide. He goes to a gun range, turns the gun on himself, and shoots himself. But not before leaving a suicide note.
In the suicide note, he stated that he'd been involved in the death of 3 women, but he didn't name the women and he didn't nominate the location where the women had died.
When you read the letter, it's full of I's. I'm doing this to be a better person. I'm doing this to get it off my conscience. I'm doing this because I need to let you know. There's this conflict within the letter between this person that he wants to be and ultimately the person that he is.
It seems cruel that he didn't reveal the names of his victims in his suicide note.
Cruel because by not naming who he had killed, the newly converted Jehovah's Witness had confessed enough to leave torment as well as grief behind.
His confession, written in a notebook and posted to his then girlfriend, said, "I did kill 3 times and it's the hardest thing to live with while trying to become a witness."
Was that all part of a mind game played by Richard Doro? He'd also left behind a trail taking in a continent because detectives can't be certain where he killed. Understanding the mind and investigating the actions of Richard Doro was a task for a Western Australian coroner in 2016 as he tried to answer a 20-year-old mystery. What had happened to Sarah Lee Davey?
Young, 21 years old, Aboriginal girl, had been staying with relatives, and apparently the last time she was seen, she told her relatives that she was going out. She went to pick up a handbag and she went to a bar.
The bar was in the small, beautiful coastal town of Broome.
About 2,000 kilometres north of Perth. Very beautiful, stunning beaches.
To this day, a former detective in the homicide squad in Western Australia can't be certain what happened to the girl who simply disappeared from Broome one day, Sarah Lee Davey.
Sarah Lee lived out at the peninsula and she used to come down most weekends and knock around with her friends.
She was seen in bars, having drinks with friends.
On that particular occasion, she'd come down to Broome. She'd been to a hotel and I think she went to a nightclub, which was an extension of one of the hotels.
It's called the Nippon Inn and was one of the few places offering late-night entertainment back then, 1997. That same weekend, an Australian Navy vessel, HMAS Geelong, docked in Broome, and 19-year-old seaman Richard Doro went on shore in search of a good time.
And that's where we think she met Richard Doro.
By the time that he met Sarah Lee, she was on her own. She would have known nothing of Doro's past. Richard Doro had grown up in an abusive environment.
We know that he was born in Bundaberg, which is in Queensland, Australia. He was born in March of 1977, and he had a terribly difficult start in life. He was sexually and physically abused by a family friend.
Abuse that continued over many years.
This would have had an immense impact on his own ability to cope with life, his self-esteem, his mental health, all of these things.
And it's pretty clear that what unfolded later, that's where the seed was sown of that violence.
I think one of the most horrific aspects of abuse is that it usually is done by someone who you know and you feel you should trust. So as a consequence of that, your ability to feel safe, to ever feel safe, is completely gone.
What he suffered may have been when Doro was younger, but abuse has a slow fuse.
We do know that there's a substantial amount of clinical evidence that that young kids that experience this will have a really hard time later on. We know they have higher levels of depression and anxiety, are much more likely to abuse substances. So traumas in childhood we're learning more about every day, but we certainly know that they're potentially harmful throughout the lifespan.
By the mid-90s, Doro had taken a momentous decision which would impact on towns and cities throughout the coastal zones of Australia and New Zealand. Was it then he began to sow the seeds of murder and of mystery?
He joins the Australian Navy. In some ways, it makes perfect sense. You kind of leave what's wrong, you go away. But when what's wrong is something that you've experienced internally, is it something you can actually run away from? Because don't forget, he doesn't run away to resolve it, to address it. He just runs away.
On board ship, his inappropriate attitude to women was clear for all to see.
We know that there's some sort of altercation with a girlfriend. He's 17, don't forget. And he's gotten the girl pregnant, and this altercation is so severe that he's reprimanded by his superiors in the Navy. So we're beginning to see these little bits of antisocial behavior quite early on.
He was described by some fellow sailors as immature. He was far from popular.
Most of his colleagues were a little bit, they were reticent about him. They described him as a compulsive liar. They couldn't trust him. There was just a bad feeling about him. He had a nickname, Bambi, which, makes you think perhaps he had big brown eyes like a deer. But what is known is that his colleagues didn't like him. They were suspicious of him. They felt that he was odd. The response to the people that worked with him was not warm at all.
Whilst a seaman on the HMAS Geelong, Doro would have plenty of time on his hands. As he lay on his bunk, he would fantasise about what he might get up to at the next port of call. In January of 1997, his boat moored in Broome, and it was then that Seaman Doro headed for a club he'd been told about and met Sarah Lee. The couple seemed to hit it off. They left together. Nothing untoward was spotted.
There was CCTV, I think, at the nightclub, and to the best of my recollection, it didn't show anything.
A young 21-year-old woman who meets, a cute 19-year-old sailor who happens to be around for a night or two. They meet at a club, they hit it off. He looked normal, he was actually, pleasant looking, and so they go off.
Western Australia-based journalist Sonia Voigt has been piecing together the evidence in the story of Richard Doro and his encounters with women who either go missing or are killed.
The pair are believed to have left in a taxi together and travelled to the wharf where HMAS Geelong was moored.
Doro walked back to the ship. He walked past the gangway that went upon the deck where there was another seaman at the top of the deck, saw him and a young lady.
Doro told shipmates that they were going to have sex. The pair walked out of sight.
They walked to the end of the pier, which was in the darkness.
Another HMAS Geelong sailor called Dean Fraser saw Doro.
When he came back, the same sailor, Dean Fraser, reported that he had scratches on his face, that Doro had scratches on his face. And he didn't just ignore it, he asked him what happened. And Doro shrugged apparently and said, she didn't want to have sex with me and she's gone now.
There were others who saw the couple that night too.
There was a reported noise, and then Doro walked back and went up the gangplank and went on board the boat.
And that was the last time that Sarah Lee was seen alive. And to this day, she remains on Australia's list of missing persons.
What happened that night by the sea in Broome? Had Sarah Lee Davey become the first of those killed by Richard Doro? The ones that he'd written of in his 2016 suicide note. police in Western Australia now know that Richard Doro has confessed to killing 3 times, but was one of his victims Sarah Lee Davey. Detectives have been able to prove that Sarah Lee had been with Richard Doro for much of that night.
There was certainly no doubt, because the sailor that was at the top of the gangway certainly said it was Doro that went past, and the friends that Sarah had been with that night certainly confirmed that she had been with him.
The morning after the couple had been together, Doro shipped out.
The HMAS Geelong left port then and headed back out to sea and towards Darwin.
Richard Doro had been in Broome just one evening, and he had left behind him a mystery. The day after being seen in a bar with Richard Doro, some of Sarah Lee's friends noticed that she wasn't around, but that wasn't unusual.
She's young, she's partying, she goes missing, nobody notices.
Effectively, it seemed to be part of her lifestyle at the age of 21, and so nobody was really worried.
It was several days later when the family of Sarah Lee Davey, who'd not been in Broome at the same time as Sarah Lee, returned. They soon reported her missing. Detective Paul Ferguson flew up from Perth to Broome to lead the hunt for Sarah Lee. The community was immediately helpful.
You know, when we went up there was a hovercraft working tourism up there, you know, even to the extent where the fellow up there donated the hovercraft and his time and did all of the shores and all in the harbour. And Broome is, you know, a tourist centre, but even the community felt the pain that the family were going through, and there was a hell of a lot of support by the local community to try and assist where they could.
It was clear something had happened.
When Sarah Lee was reported missing, and there was some concern in relation to the fact that she hadn't accessed a bank account and other bits and pieces, the detectives took it on as a suspected death.
As they tried to clear up the mystery, detectives were interested to hear from the young sailor that she'd been seen with. The Geelong was now in Darwin.
Durham was certainly without a doubt the person of interest that we try to focus on, and the investigation also then looked at his time in the service, where else he had been, whether there was any other incidents where he'd been.
Officers flew to Darwin to meet up with him.
They got up there, they made arrangements to interview him. He reported sick, and the medical team up in Darwin within the Navy said he wasn't fit to be interviewed.
Eventually, he did allow himself to be questioned, but not for long.
And midway through the interview, he got upset and the interview was terminated.
Doro gave nothing away. The police had wanted answers to questions. When the appeals were made for information about the missing Sarah Lee, more locals came forward to report what they had seen and heard that night. Doro was most definitely in the frame.
There were witnesses that heard yelling and screaming from the wharf that night. There was a local fisherman and he said he heard a female yelling, "Get off me," and words such as, "What are you doing?"
Doro had said yes, he had been with Sarah Lee, but they had gone their separate ways. It was hard to believe him. He offered no explanation for the scratches on his face, but there simply was not enough evidence to prove a case against Richard Doro, who was subjected to further questioning, this time by the Navy.
It's not long after this that his behavior is causing so much concern by those around him that he's asked to see a psychiatrist and get an evaluation.
Doro was referred for psychological assessment and he admitted to alcohol and cannabis abuse.
That evaluation is very telling. So they note that he's had a substance abuse and misuse with both drugs and alcohol, but they also critically note that he's displaying quite severe antisocial behaviors, and also that he scores highly on a trait that they call amorality, where he sees the world as a dangerous place, as a place that rejects him, and therefore he begins to enact that upon the world himself. In fact, one of the lines in the report says that there's an expectation that this young man would be prone to angry outbursts.
All of that may be true, but it did not prove him to be a killer, leaving the community back in Broome in limbo. A limbo that would last decades.
Any regional centre that has a major incident, whether it be a fatality or a homicide, something like that, has an impact on everyone in the town.
Doro's final letter has not helped clear up the mystery. Something had happened that night by the sea involving Sarah Lee Davey. The case of the missing Sarah Lee remains unsolved. It's a mystery. Her family denied a last chance to see her remains.
Well, like all prolonged suspicious death investigations, trying to find her body was paramount.
I think what's really sad is that Sarah Lee's body has never been found.
Sarah Lee Davey was last seen in January 1997. An inquest in 2016 was not able to designate her as having been murdered.
The coroner looked at all of the evidence and the coroner came to a finding that she was dead. However, the cause of death was unknown.
Cause of death unknown. She had been with Richard Doro. She had been at the end of the wharf. Screams had been heard, but that was not enough proof that she had been murdered. The coroner returned an open verdict. Some believe that Sarah Lee was one of those that Doro was referring to in his suicide note.
And although the circumstances surrounding her death couldn't be established, Richard Doro's association with her and his actions at the end of the wharf were raised by the coroner, but as the coroner stated, the fact that she may have fallen in off the end of the wharf, she might have jumped in, he couldn't make that comment, so it was an open finding.
But that is not the view of everybody connected with the inquiry.
Sarah Lee's death is still in limbo. Sarah Lee's parents would have some comfort that the investigation was on the right track. They were very much aware of the hurdles in relation to the alleged sightings of Sarah Lee after her meeting with Doro. So there would be some relief that the perpetrator had been identified, but legally the case is still open.
Was Sarah Lee victim number one? What about Doro's other victims? And where had he struck? Between 1995 and 1997, Richard Doro had docked in a number of cities.
What really makes this case so difficult is that over a really short time, just a few years, he travels kind of the breadth of Australia. He's in Broome, he's in Sydney, he's in Darwin, he's in Perth. I mean, this is a vast area. So he's constantly moving. So anyone trying to piece together this puzzle is going to have a really hard time.
Where else would the police investigation lead? Who else had he killed? Since the suicide which left so many questions unanswered, detectives throughout Australia have faced a challenge. Do they have any missing person files of women that Doro may have killed? Doro's Navy lifestyle opens up grim possibilities.
Part of the inquiry is to monitor where Doro had been throughout his service in the Navy and see if there'd been any other incidents that was similar to what we were looking at.
A fact which complicates any analysis of the events of the timeline of Richard Doro.
Doro's career as a naval seaman allowed him to travel from port to port across the nation, and he became almost ghost-like. He was elusive. He was a stranger in every town that he visited.
So this too feeds in to his ability to kind of carry on like nothing's happening. You know, he's got a built-in alibi with everybody on the boat, and he's able to move from place to place, and it doesn't seem suspicious because, of course, that's part of his job.
There is one murder which Richard Doro stood trial for. Again, the story is made complex by the facts of Doro's nomadic life. 15 months after his night in Broome, with Sarah Lee still missing, Doro pitched up in Sydney. No longer in the Navy, he was then working as a mechanic and living not far from Rosebery Avenue in the city. To those he lived amongst, he appeared normal enough. Held down a steady job, was known to have female partners.
He could have, as his friends thought, he could be a ladies' man, and that he was attractive enough to attract young women and the trust of young women.
He was able to keep on with his life and move ahead like nothing was happening. So we know that he was able to hold down a job. We know that he was able to hold down a relationship.
Rachel Campbell was living in Sydney at the same time as Doro. She was 29 and had a daughter, but her life was not going as she'd planned. She and her boyfriend had experienced a messy split. Rachel was working in the city's red light district. The sex trade kept her in money. Rachel's life on the fringes of society was to end all too soon, on the night that she met Richard Doro.
In 1998, a young woman called Rachel Campbell was found in abominable circumstances in a car park of a church.
Rachel's mutilated body was found at St. Joseph's Catholic Church on Rosebery Avenue. By abandoning her in the car park, her attacker will have known it would soon be discovered. For those heading to church, a gruesome discovery was awaiting them.
It was a terrible attack, multiple stab wounds, human bite marks. I think the police were shocked themselves.
She'd been bitten, she'd been raped, she'd been strangled, she'd been stabbed.
Rachel had been out working as a sex worker. Whoever had killed her probably had had intercourse with her and appeared to have used a condom. 2 used condoms were found nearby. So vital evidence was discovered which gave hope that her attacker could soon be found.
DNA was taken from her body.
And living nearby?
Records show that in 1998, Doro was living in the vicinity of the Sydney church by which prostitute Rachel Campbell's body was found.
What we do know is that Richard Doro lived only a couple of streets away.
Doro, however, was not suspected. His DNA was not on the Australian National Database. There had been no witnesses. Linda Papadopoulos, in analysing the life of Richard Doro, sees a pattern between the disappearance of Sarah Lee Davey and the murder of Rachel Campbell. Her attacker, as Doro often did, seems to have lost control, to have snapped.
He had a very explosive, impulsive type of anger that would cloud his judgment. And one has to wonder if it wasn't something that played out that night as well. He was expecting something to go one way, it went the other way. And that's where he became extremely violent and aggressive. And again, we have lots of people that speak to the fact that he was quite a violent, aggressive person. And, that he was very quick to go there. And if that's the case, this young woman being alone with him in a situation where no one knew where she was, no one could hear her, made her extremely vulnerable, especially if she went against something that he wanted.
Detectives interviewed anybody who knew Rachel, spoke to those who went to the church, went on exhaustive house-to-house inquiries in the Rosebery Avenue neighbourhood and in the red light district of Sydney, but they were unable to make a breakthrough. At her inquest, the coroner made a prophetic remark. What we need, he said, is to find the person with the DNA that matches the DNA that we have now. That may never occur. It could occur tomorrow. Rachel's murder had taken place in 1998, and by the year 2001, there had still been no arrest. Doro needed to make a mistake to commit a crime which would mean his DNA would be taken. For now, it was time for him to move on. He headed out of Sydney. By 2001, Doro was back in his native Queensland when he got into trouble.
We know that things for Richard Doro aren't going great. Reports say that his behavior is very erratic, he becomes very violent, as predicted, has a lot of aggressive outbursts. In fact, one time he's so aggressive that he has some sort of altercation on the street and tries to mow someone down with a car, to kill them.
He runs down a pedestrian on purpose. It's a ferocious decision, terrible injuries.
It was 2 years since the discovery in a church car park of a body. He pleaded guilty, but offered his history of abuse when a child as mitigation.
When he was charged with the deliberate running down of a pedestrian, the judge took it into account. And the suggestion, I think, by a psychiatrist that he had confused his abuser for the person that he ran down. Now, the person that he ran down, it turns out, had attacked him earlier in the day. So there was this sort of psychological maelstrom, if you like, and his sentence was much more lenient than was expected.
Instead of getting a lengthy sentence, Doro was out in a year.
Arguably, that sentence was quite lenient. 5 years prison with a 12-month non-parole period which he served. However, that charge saw Doro's DNA added to Australia's national database.
He may have been treated leniently, and possibly correctly so, but the crime was serious enough for Richard Doro to be ordered to give a DNA swab.
The nub of this is interesting because that's when they get his DNA on file. And in a lot of ways, it's this moment that allows us to really get to know what was going on with Richard Doro.
Perhaps there was finally a chance to tie Doro to the murder of Rachel Campbell, and possibly to solve the mystery of what had happened to Sarah Lee Davey. But that was not the case. Whilst detectives in New South Wales had taken DNA from the scene of Rachel Campbell's murder, the arrest of Doro in Queensland was not linked to that murder. There has to be some evidence to link a traffic offence in Queensland to a sex crime and murder years earlier in Sydney in order for investigators to request to see if there is a DNA match which can be made.
He basically slips the net.
On his release, Doro set sail again, this time for New Zealand, where he lives in Auckland, working as a dive instructor. In 2006, another complication in the mystery of the disappearance of Sarah Lee Davey helps Richard Doro. Detectives in Western Australia make a link, one which turns out to be false, between a murder in the outback and the disappearance of Sarah Lee Davey.
Police were thrown off the scent of Doro in 2006 when they believed another man may have been Sarah Lee Davey's killer. That man was Bradley Murdoch, who was, and he's actually still serving, a life sentence for the 2001 murder of British tourist Peter Falconio in the Central Australian outback. You see, Murdoch was actually in the Broome region at the time Sarah Lee disappeared.
Which meant Doro, at that stage still not in the frame for the murder of Rachel Campbell, was no longer the main suspect in Sarah Lee's disappearance. Doro went on with his life, eventually heading for Perth.
In 2009, he was back in Western Australia. He was living here in the Perth suburb of Osborne Park.
Not only was he in work and had a partner, he seemed no longer the impulsive, angry young man.
It seems that far beyond, the usual serial killers that we speak about, there's something very different here that doesn't fit that mold, that doesn't fit that kind of cookie cutter mold of someone that never had empathy, never had, any sense of remorse. This is someone that was very much, just not in control of his emotions. And as he grew and changed, went on, a real emotional journey.
He was working as a commercial driver most of the time, but also still found work on the sea. He helped maintain rescue submarines. All in all, he'd become a straight up and down citizen, but his past was about to catch up with him. In 2009, New South Wales police carry out a cold case review of the murder of Rachel Campbell.
There was a match found between Doro's DNA and DNA from Rachel Campbell's body. And so again, the spotlight is back on him. He's brought in, he's questioned.
And that means they're able to link him to the murder of Rachel Campbell.
And he was then extradited to New South Wales to face trial.
It appeared that justice would be done, that Richard Doro would be convicted of the murder of Rachel Campbell and possibly finally forced to admit what had happened with Sarah Lee Davey. Could Rachel Campbell be confirmed as one of the 3 victims that Doro says he killed? In 2010, prosecutors and police in Sydney prepared the evidence against Richard Doro. Despite the fact that DNA found on Rachel and on condoms discovered in the St. James's Church car park near to her body, the case was not necessarily straightforward. She may have been with more men that night, Doro being just one of them, and she was estranged from her boyfriend. Might he have borne a grudge? There were potentially more suspects than Richard Doro, who pleaded not guilty and was about to walk free.
When he was charged and the jury then acquitted him for this particular case where the DNA clearly linked him to the dead girl, he admitted that he'd had sex with her and he admitted he bit her, but wouldn't admit that he killed her. The defence then brought in the fact that she had an estranged boyfriend, and that potentially, the doubt was thrown open and the jury effectively could not find that it was beyond reasonable doubt.
It seems incredible now, but the life that Rachel led had been in the shadows. Doro might well have been one of a number of clients that she'd had that night. The jury had believed him. In the crimes he was associated with, Doro seems to have been able to evoke sympathy, or at the very least, credibility. Crew members had believed him when he said that he had left Sarah Lee behind, and that the scratches on his face were nothing to do with any crime. The judge, in his trial for driving into a man in Queensland, accepted that the abuse Doro had suffered had influenced his aggression. And now a jury believed that he was not a killer. Linda Papadopoulos puts Doro's apparent personality in a different category to that of a cold-blooded psychopath.
People just feel there's always that little bit of doubt. And I think the reason for that is that at some level, he didn't fit that picture of the classic serial killer.
Some detectives in Sydney were surprised by the verdict, but Doro had played the system. For Detective Paul Ferguson in Western Australia, Doro's acquittal may not have proved his guilt, but neither did it prove his innocence.
Like a lot of crimes, police have the responsibility to undertake an investigation. They do that investigation, they send it to the courts. At the end of the day, particularly if you're talking about the District Court or the Supreme Court, members of the jury, if they deem the person is not guilty, then that person walks free.
So was he a killer? Was Rachel victim number 2 mentioned in Doro's suicide note? Rachel Campbell had met Richard Doro on that night in 1998.
We don't know if he approached Rachel with the intent of killing her. He may have approached Rachel with the intent of sleeping with her. But ultimately what happens is a very violent, horrific attack.
She had been brutally murdered and her body cynically abandoned adjacent to a church. Doro had been with her before the attack, knew the church car park. He lived nearby, had an impulsive temper. But, officially not guilty, Richard Doro had walked out of the court in Sydney and returned to Perth. The trial had ended in 2010. Before long, Doro would become a changed man.
It's now 2014 and Richard Doro has literally lived in every state in Australia and New Zealand. He's traveled everywhere. We know that he's connected at this point to at least 2 homicides. And we also know that this is when he chooses to turn to God.
It was back here in Perth that Doro found God through the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Now, religion's interesting because it allows people to make sense of a world that feels chaotic. So even though bad things happen, there's a reason that bad things happen, that everyone can be saved as long as you want to be saved, that there's goodness in everybody, that, even if you've done something horrible, that there is love out there, there is forgiveness. So you begin to see the world in a different way.
His neighbours accepted him. He was Richie, a nice guy, not bad looking either.
He appeared as someone that had remorse. And I think his look, he was very much boy next door. I think people are predisposed to kind of feeling that when someone, looks like, their cousin, their uncle, their neighbor, that maybe there's nothing kind of behind that. And I think because of that, this juxtaposition between this violent, aggressive man and this actually very fragile, remorseful man that we saw later on, while incongruent, I think I think is the thing that allowed him to function for as long as he did and never get caught.
Life in the Byford area of Perth got back to normal after the trial that he had faced for the murder of Rachel Campbell. Sometime between 2011 and 2016, the former seaman began a new hobby: guns. He was known to go to the Lone Rangers shooting complex. He now had a permanent partner. So in Byford, Perth, Richard Doro got on with his routine. But something had changed. God and the Jehovah's Witnesses were now in the life of Richard Doro.
This is where it doesn't really fit in with that sort of, central casting serial killer. This is a man who clearly at some point felt enormous remorse. He found religion joining the Jehovah's Witnesses.
And in many ways, we know that his words following this religious epiphany actually attest to the fact that he begins, at least slightly, to see the world in a different way.
Being a Jehovah's Witness was about seeking forgiveness for any sins that he may have committed, and by 2016, that fact was going to answer at least some of the mysteries in the life of Richard Doro. It was now that he chose to reveal some of the truths of his life. In a darkened room in his home in Byford, he composed his thoughts. He put pen to paper and set about telling the world that he was a killer.
He posted his personal belongings, including his laptop and a suicide note, back to his partner. And within that, he made clear that he couldn't live with this huge guilt anymore.
But it was then he also took the decision in writing his confession, which has caused agony and mystery. He did not name who he had killed, and he revealed that he had not taken 1 or 2 lives, which many suspect, but 3.
Unfortunately, the note didn't give any names, so the mystery remains.
He goes to all the trouble of writing a suicide note and a confession, yet he doesn't name his victims. So the question is this his way of kind of, asserting control or torturing, or is it that he found these acts so horrific that he couldn't face up to them?
Having written his note, Doro was not about to stay around to answer the question. He drove to the shooting range. Inside, owners are meticulous in ensuring that firearms can only point at targets in the distance. But the mechanic brought with him the means to release a weapon, and in a booth, he turned it upon himself.
This fellow went to a firearm range and used the firearm at that range to shoot himself.
By killing himself, having admitted to 3 murders, Doro was leaving tragic mysteries unsolved. Was this a mind game being played by a serial killer?
With that letter, he takes with him ultimately what will be an unsolved mystery, because we know this other person could have been anywhere across this huge landmass during the span where he had this killing spree.
For Paul Ferguson, the note is a further tragedy for the family members.
I did 38 years in the police force, and you meet a lot of victims, and a victim can be a direct victim from an assault or whatever the case may be, or it can be the family of someone that's been killed. So, closure is important to a lot of people, and when something like that occurs, particularly if you have some knowledge that your child had met with a sailor or a soldier or whatever the case may be, and then someone nominates, yes, I've killed 3 people, of course it would cause a lot of pain.
The coroner's inquest, which investigated the events of the death of Lori Davey in 2016, recorded an open verdict, and officially Doro remains acquitted of the murder of Rachel Campbell.
That doesn't necessarily mean that the investigative team or the family of the victim, whether that be a homicide or whether it be some other crime, aren't convinced in their own mind that the guilty party hasn't been convicted.
So for those investigating events, there are some answers provided in the note that he killed 3 times, but tantalising questions remain.
While it's assumed that 2 were Sarah Lee Davey and Rachel Campbell, who was his 3rd victim? And where was he or she killed? That's not been an easy puzzle for investigators to solve.
And yet that is now the challenge. Doro, when serving as a sailor, had moored throughout Australia and in New Zealand. Where had he killed? The suicide note was so vague, it leaves open the possibility that he also may have killed in his native Queensland. The mind of a self-confessed serial killer continues to taunt from his grave, and yet, for those investigating his mind, the suicide note is evidence not of a desire to control and manipulate those relatives of the victims, but because at the last, the abused Richard Doro may have realised the error of his homicidal ways.
He didn't have to confess, right? He didn't really tell, anyone anything they don't know. I wonder if it was just one last way of kind of saying, maybe I'm not as broken as everyone thinks I am because I'm doing this one last thing. And don't forget, this is, immediately following him finding religion. And one of the things that religion gives a lot of people is the ability to forgive themselves, or at least the ability to see that maybe there's another way of looking at things. And I wonder if that's not what we're seeing, at least to some extent in the letter.
That is not the view of those who investigated him in New South Wales and in Western Australia. If he had been truly remorseful, then he would have left behind confirmation that he had killed Sarah Lee and Rachel Campbell, and he also would have named his third victim. There is, of course, another possibility. Because of the nature of his days in the Navy, there is actually a good reason why he hasn't named his third victim.
Maybe Doro didn't himself know all his victims' identities.
Doro knew the name of Sarah Lee. Even having only just met her, he had forgotten by the time he was back on the ocean waves. Subsequent interviews will have reminded him. He may not have known the name of Rachel Campbell when he was with her on the night of her death, but the subsequent court case will have reminded him. But he was not interviewed about the other murder, faced no court case. So if his third killing was committed whilst he was a sailor, it may be another secret, kept by the sea and by Richard Doro. In the pretty city of Spokane, a serial killer is on the loose.
This is where Kathy Brisbau's body was eventually recovered.
The man they hunted was one with dual obsessions, using prostitutes and weapons.
Police not only know that they have somebody with an arsenal of weapons, but they actually have clinical evidence from a doctor saying this person is potentially dangerous.
Douglas Perry was the gun-obsessed murderer targeting sex workers, but tracking him was not going to be easy.
By 1994, he was identifying as a woman in a man's body, and he was a self-described transsexual.
It's in Thailand that Douglas Perry becomes Donna Perry.
As detectives in Spokane attend the latest discovery of a body, the question arises, what could possibly be going on inside the mind of a serial killer? If it could talk, the Spokane River would have a lot of stories to tell, not all of them good. It once teemed with salmon heading upstream. A dam built in the 19th century put paid to that. The rainbow trout caught today are not fit for human consumption because of the pollution caused by industrial practices. And by its banks, a brutal series of murders carried out by a man with a deeply disturbed mind.
He's basically just done with this. This may be the only time he was fought with, and he is done with this, and that is gone, and he spent too much time and made too much noise, and he's got to get out of here. So he's not going to go down there and try and cover the body. So when you stand here looking down, you can see it pretty easily. Just like the others, there was no attempt to hide the bodies in either the other two. They were just disposed of.
The victims were Yolanda Sapp, Nikki Lowe, and Kathy Brisbau.
The three murders occurred over a period of about 3 months at the beginning of 1990. The women were all sex workers in the area of East Sprague Avenue.
The man who killed them was Douglas Perry. It took 22 years to catch him. By the time he was in custody, he was no longer Douglas. He was Donna.
Donna Perry claims that one of the reasons why she had that sex change operation was that she felt that if she had her genitals taken away as a man and got rid of that portion of her life, then she wouldn't be as violent. She wouldn't have that desire anymore to kill.
Perry said, well, Doug didn't stop it, Donna stopped it.
What made Douglas Perry a serial killer? And why did Donna make him stop? Getting inside the mind of Douglas Perry begins in the countryside of the state of Washington.
Doug Perry was living as a child in an orchard in Omak, Washington, which is kind of this north-central part of the state of Washington. It's rural, predominantly farming, ranching communities. So he was raised on that orchard, father, mother, older brother.
So far, so normal, but far from the complete picture.
He was molested by his dad, picked on in the family, and abused emotionally, sexually, and physically.
The adolescent was one crazy, mixed-up kid. His best friends became guns. He had a wide selection.
He really seemed to have an affinity to guns. He loved them a lot.
When he describes a firearm, it's almost as if it's taken on a human characteristics and he's in love with the actual weapon itself.
His father died in 1968 from a burst blood vessel. His mother, who then became the primary caregiver, was admitted into a psychiatric facility with schizophrenia. Guns became Douglas's lifelong obsession. By 1974, aged 21, Douglas Perry had quite the collection as he pursued his hobby. He hoarded them, tended to their every need, and fired them into the Washington countryside, long into the night.
That many of all these various pistols and rifles and shotguns and all of this ammunition, I mean, like, this guy is preparing for battle.
The once abused child had grown into a man willing and able to defend himself. His rap sheet in the 70s included assault and charges related to using his array of weapons. Linda Papadopoulos has been delving into the facts of Perry's life, unlocking the secrets of his mind.
In 1990, Perry is living in Spokane, Washington.
The previous year, he'd been picked up by police for patronizing a prostitute in his new hometown. It was behavior associated with a second obsession: sex workers.
One of the things that we do know is that he often used sex workers, and in fact, we are not aware of any significant relationships outside of this sort of transactional relationship that he had with sex workers.
What does that say about the complicated mind of Douglas Perry?
You know, this attests to perhaps the idea that he felt uncomfortable around social relationships. He felt unable to connect with people, or perhaps more insidiously, what he valued within the relationships that he had with sex workers was his ability to dictate the terms, to control, to use. So there was something about kind of commodifying and objectifying women.
Summing up the makeup of the mind of Douglas Parry in 1989, it's clear he's a dangerous man. He tended to violence, and his lifestyle was dominated by a love of guns and a use of sex workers. And there was a third element, his feelings generally towards women.
He didn't like women. He found them disgusting and vile. At least the women that were involved in the sex trade, that were prostitutes. He viewed them as pond scum.
That's how he described sex workers to a cellmate when serving time later on for weapons offences. A conversation featuring an outlandish, still unproven claim.
He allegedly told his cellmate that he had murdered up to 9 prostitutes and that he killed them because they were pond scum who were wasting their lives, and that because they could have children and he couldn't.
What he said is he hated the prostitutes, and he hated them because they could reproduce, and they were wasting it.
He may have hated them, but by 1990 he was spending a lot of time with prostitutes in a city, Spokane, which stars itself as offering urban chic. Outwardly affluent, the sex workers are not easy to find unless you know where to look. There are some areas where chic has been swapped for cheap sex. Yolanda Anastasia Sapp, just 26 years old, would ready herself most evenings to ply her trade in the Sprague area of the city. Her favourite spot, just a mile from the river.
It is important to remember that regardless of the choices that people had made, could be because of addictions or any number of reasons, that these were the daughters of somebody that loved them, the friends, the sisters of somebody who cared, regardless of their life choices that they made.
Douglas Parry knew the area and, aged 37, had decided to act on his dual obsession: hating prostitutes, loving guns. As he cruised Spokane's red light district, Yolanda Sapp was preparing for a night's work, about to pick up her next paying customer.
And Yolanda basically found herself in this awful situation with a person that described sex workers as the scum of the earth. This is somebody that not only saw women as less than, but in particular he saw sex workers as disposable, as not even human.
Not far from the river, an area of wasteland near East Trent Road, Spokane. Parry had already checked out the lie of the land.
He came up here and had to have parked in this area. This hasn't changed that much up here. It's always been a little bit of a kind of a turnout, turnaround. It's secluded mostly from Trent, so people could come back here and kids could drink beer and that kind of stuff.
The noise from the Great Spokane River drowns out a lot, like screams perhaps. It is February 21st, 1990, when Douglas Parry is in his car with a gun and an urge to kill. He also has a plan to avoid being caught. On the streets of Spokane, Yolanda Sapp cut a striking figure and was, according to her boyfriend, popular to those looking to pay for sex.
This is a woman like any other. This is a young woman with hopes and dreams and desire to be loved and cared about like any other. And I think it's important to remember that.
Douglas Parry came across her. It's likely she walked up to his car, asked if he was looking to party.
We have a person who has an obsessive and possibly strange relationship with the guns that he owns, with the prostitutes in the area, with the women in his life, who had an opportunity to lash out.
Perry, no stranger to the ritual of hiring a sex worker, beckoned her inside his vehicle. The couple drove off. They headed to Perry's home. It soon becomes clear Perry is not interested in sex. Within hours of picking Yolanda Sapp up on the streets of Spokane, Perry had shot her 3 times. He headed towards the river to get rid of Yolanda's body. The next day, February 22nd, Yolanda was reported missing. Later, passers-by on the trail overlooking the river called police. Yolanda's feet were bound by a distinctive green blanket. Aside from that, she was naked, her body left as if a trophy on display.
When you read the report about how this young woman's body was found, it was treated with a lot of contempt. Her breasts and genitalia are exposed.
Douglas Perry wasn't trying to hide his victims and get away with murder. He was trying to send a message. This was his calling card. He was displaying them as if they were trophies.
In a bitter irony, Perry knew his victims as friends of his own girlfriend, also a sex worker. He would even help the prostitutes by bringing them food, yet now he was looking to kill them.
He had an interesting relationship with the prostitutes who worked on that street. He also worked on that street. He told police later that he had been feeding them and taking them to his home, and people saw him doing that. He was presenting the image of someone who was trying to help prostitutes.
I think what this really speaks to is this kind of incongruous relationship that he has with what it means to be a woman. At the same time, he deifies and vilifies. So the woman is something that is the mother, is this angelic figure that can give life, that can create, and then the prostitute, the sex worker, is someone that's the opposite of that, it's the underbelly of that takes away life because she doesn't have children. And interestingly enough, I think he sees himself as kind of delving in both. On the one hand, I want to become this mother and be better, and I'll never be able to do that. So what I can do, though, is balance the stakes by killing what I see in these awful words he used as the pawn scum of the earth.
He'd killed just once, but he would soon kill again. Perry was not considered a suspect in the murder of Yolanda Sapp. His rap sheet didn't suggest him as someone who should be in the frame.
But if you look at the crimes that he partook in, from simple assault to assaults, most of them were firearm related. He would be on the radar screen for firearms type of offenses.
So he was free and able to hunt for another victim.
Clearly, at this point, Yolanda's friends, other sex workers in the area, would have heard about this, and this would have induced a climate of fear. One of their own, a young woman, was killed in the most brutal of ways.
Behind the barbed wire and locked doors of seedy motel rooms off East Sprague in Spokane, Nikki Lowe, 35 years old, worked as a prostitute. Known to police as a drug user, she was officially designated a street-level prostitute. As night fell in the city, Nikki, like her co-sex workers, would put herself on display before joining the tricks in their cars. She might head to a district of warehouses or alleyways. She may head towards the main roads over the Spokane River. One, Green Street, has a busy underpass. Not far from this underpass, Douglas Perry slows down on seeing Nikki Lowe. She will have had no problem approaching him. His was a familiar face.
He would have been well known in the prostitution community because he would have been a familiar face as somebody who dates these very prostitutes that he would kill.
She climbs in. and the couple head for Perry's place. On March 25th, 1990, a mile from the underpass on East South Riverton, the body of Nikki Lowe was found. She was draped over the guardrail next to the road, abandoned, like an object to be thrown in the trash.
He murdered and posed and placed these women naked in the very locations where their bodies were found.
He dehumanizes them, and there's even an arrogance. The way that he tries to rationalize what he did is by saying, well, you know, they weren't needed. There's no point in having these women in society. They give nothing. So almost trying to not only excuse himself, but say he's done a good thing.
Searching for evidence, detectives came across a trash dumpster nearby in which they found, amongst other things, a sweater, a pair of blue tennis shoes, sex lubricant, and a hypodermic syringe. The contents of the dumpster were those of Nikki Lowe. The evidence was kept, but at that stage did not incriminate Douglas Perry. He was still a free man. "51 days after the discovery of the body of Nikki Lowe, Kathy Brisbau left downtown Spokane and headed towards her patch where she worked as a sex worker. It was about 200 yards from the river on a road called East Trent. Douglas Perry spotted her, pulled up alongside her. The gun obsessive was armed with one of his small caliber weapons. Sometime later that night, Kathy Brisbau, still alive, had gone with Perry to a secluded area that he knew all too well.
Doug Perry brought Kathy Brisbau here. He drove in along that embankment where that dirt mound is built up. I think basically they came here to do the sex act, whatever that was. And that either before, during, or after, she must have had some sort of event that caused her enough concern that she probably tried to get away from him. So she ended up losing a coat. She lost her shoes over there. The jacket was found up in this area. She probably outran him down to there because when we get down to the bottom of that hill, he's probably chasing her, and then we start seeing blood drops. So he may have injured her up here, but we wouldn't see the blood till she gets down there on the path.
Brisbau had told her fellow sex workers that if she was abducted, she wouldn't go without a fight.
Well, I think basically she was fighting for her life.
Kathy Brisbau could not know it, but her fight would lead to the arrest of a female prisoner called Donna, thousands of miles away from the Spokane River, and 22 years later. Hers was a story long in the telling. Kathy Brisbau's fight with Douglas Perry continued as she and he tussled down the embankment near the Spokane River. As she tried to stay alive, she grabbed at his arms.
She obviously battled well enough to collect DNA under her fingernails of skin from him. It wouldn't have been from scratching his coat or grabbing his hair. It's more likely that she scratched some skin off and probably left scratches on him, doing it to collect enough skin so that would be still there 20 years later.
The encounter saw the couple scramble down to what is now called the Centennial Trail. Detectives could follow the path of the scrap.
Back then, kind of starting in this area, we started to see some blood drops and some pieces of hair and clumps of hair on the ground. And right down here on that bush here was a sundress. So if you keep going just a little bit past that is a spot where you look over the edge and her body was visible from up here down over the edge.
At some point, one of the guns that Douglas Perry considered part of his family put an end to the fight. Kathy was shot through the head and the chest and left to die at the foot of this trail.
In this general area, and there wasn't quite as much foliage as there is now, but in this general area, her body was about halfway down that embankment.
Spokane had suffered the loss of 3 women in just 4 months.
3 prostitutes, all killed in the same general area, posed in the same way. There are too many coincidences, all killed by firearms. I would definitely be thinking, there's a link, there's a connection. We have a serial killer amongst our midst.
They started a task force to work on a serial killer in 1990. DNA was in a position where you needed a pretty significant amount of blood, a blood drop, to get any DNA results.
The DNA exposed at the scene of the crime was that of Kathy, not her killer. So the original investigators needed more evidence.
So they were focusing on other trace evidence, and fibers were a big deal. There were green fibers that were all throughout this case that seemed to be somewhat of a commonality in the cases.
Green fibers on the clothes of Kathy Brisbau were eventually recovered from the deserted area. Green fibers were found on the second victim, Nikki Lowe, and on a green blanket binding the legs of Yolanda Sabb. But that evidence led detectives nowhere. In fact, this was a case where too many avenues of inquiry existed, none of which led to the killer.
There were many suspects. They were prostitutes, they had drug habits, therefore they had drug dealers, they had pimps, they had people that are known to, in general, not be nice to you if you didn't behave correctly.
But the persona of Douglas Perry wouldn't be on anyone's radar in regards to the killing of these ladies. He would be on the radar for firearms violations, not these kind of murders.
The fingernails of Kathy Brisbau were kept on file. Who knew when they might be useful? Under those nails, fragments of skin so small that they offered no DNA reading. But one day they would. As months passed, no credible leads were found. The case went cold. Douglas Perry remained free. By the mid-1990s, Perry was beginning to come to terms with who he actually was. Douglas seems to have decided to become Donna.
By 1994, he was identifying as a woman in a man's body, and he was a self-described transsexual. So it's possible that he was having relationships with women and men. He said he was a male prostitute as well, so he was probably using both personas at the time, both Doug and Donna.
In 1998, Perry is again arrested. Prison had by no means quenched his desire to cruise the streets of Spokane in search of sex.
Perry was stopped by the police down there. After a date that he had, he took this girl back to his house.
He brings a sex worker home, and she's really upset by what she sees. She sees an arsenal of weapons.
She was really creeped out about the weapons, all the weapons around.
We're talking, not kitchen knives here. We're talking crossbows. We're talking, assortment of guns and paraphernalia.
He was saying he wasn't going to hurt her because he liked her. So when he took her back downtown to the street corner, she flagged down the first cop, she said, I want to tell you about this weird date that I just had. Oh, and there he goes. And so the police went and stopped him and identified him.
So she goes to the police and she raises the alarm.
Police find 5 pipe bombs, 49 guns, 20,000 rounds of ammunition, all in his house. There was yet more evidence in the paperwork recovered by police.
They find an assessment by a psychologist that attests to his pathological feelings and beliefs around women. It attests to these feelings of sort of intense misogyny for women. It attests to his violence.
There is writings about his mental health, and it's from mental health workers about his disdain and disgust for women.
So the police now not only know that they have somebody with an arsenal of weapons, which suggests that he has a predisposition, or at least a like or an interest in violence or violent weapons, but they actually also have clinical evidence from a doctor saying this person is potentially dangerous.
So the Spokane police have indications now that this is a man with some psychotic problems that hates women.
The psychological assessment that the police find on Perry gives the police the first insights into his gender dysphoria. So actually, we can deduce that possibly this assessment was there because he was thinking about having a sex change. Clearly within the report, the doctor outlines the steps that he would need to take in terms of living as a female, in terms of what he'd need to do and the parameters around that. So this suggests that while he's dealing with these very sort of intense feelings of violence and misogyny around, you know, the females that he encounters, at the same time, he's also dealing with this identity crisis about, you know, what his gender is, who he wants to be, and how he's going to change who he is at the moment.
Perry is jailed on offences related to his arms stash, but he is still not considered a murder suspect, let alone a serial killer. During his sentence, he's transferred to an institution dealing with prisoners who have mental health issues.
This is largely based on his own self-report, was that he had been diagnosed with paranoid personality disorder.
It is now, when in the mental home, that Perry unburdens his conscience to a fellow prisoner. He reveals what he really thinks about the kind of woman that he has killed.
He shares intimate details with a fellow cellmate about his vile disgust and hatred for women. He talks about prostitutes and refers to them as that pond scum. But more importantly, he says he hates them, finds them so disgusting because he himself cannot produce, cannot procreate, cannot carry a child. And he looks at those prostitutes as a waste of time because they're wasting their bodies. Now, he shares those details with that inmate, and that would later be very helpful in the prosecution.
The witness would be helpful, but not for another 14 years. After being released, Douglas Perry decides it's time for drastic action. He no longer wants to be a man.
In the year 2000, he's finally released from prison where he was serving 2 years for weapons offenses. And he decides finally to address the gender dysphoria he's been feeling and goes to Thailand for sex reassignment surgery.
Douglas Perry has gathered enough money that he takes a trip and he goes to Thailand. It's in Thailand that Douglas Perry becomes Donna Perry.
A chance to finally address the real issues that he'd wrestled with perhaps all of his life. Or did Douglas Perry suspect that one day he might be brought to justice as a serial killer? So why not become Donna?
Some people have pointed out to the fact that, you know what, maybe he did this as a way of throwing the police off the scent. Yes, he spoke to the cellmate about the murders, but he didn't confess to the police about them at this point. So is he leaving the country, you know, changing his appearance, changing his gender, because this is something that he really wants to do? Or is this kind of ticking a lot of boxes in terms of the fear that he feels about being held accountable for his crimes?
If he was, it had worked. Douglas Perry was left behind in Thailand in the year 2000, and Donna Perry returned to the States. That fact was not going to help murder squad detectives.
Meanwhile, back in the States, in Spokane, Washington, you have these detectives, a 10-year-old murder case, 3 women. They're convinced they're looking for a man. Perhaps they'll find Douglas Perry, but they're looking for a man. There's no way that they could have ever possibly conceived that the same man who hated women so much would become the very women that he hated. So as a homicide detective, very difficult. It would then again be as if Douglas Perry was wiped off the face of the earth. And therefore, where do you go?
The investigation went nowhere for another 9 years. Advances in DNA technology meant that Spokane detectives like Jim Dresbach felt it worthwhile sending the fingernails of Kathy Brisbau, still on file, to a lab in Marysville, Washington State.
Well, in 2009, not 6 months after the case was sent to the Marysville lab, I got a call from One of the scientists has said, asked me to sit down, which I always love when you get a call that says, are you sitting down? Because it never seems to mean bad news. So I said, oh yeah. She said that she developed a full male profile from under the left middle finger of Kathy Brisbau. And therefore, that then is a huge lead that we've kind of been waiting for, and everything else had been exhausted.
Almost certainly, Dresbach now had the DNA profile of whoever had killed Kathy. He was hoping that the killer's DNA would be on the national database called CODIS, and if it was, would it reveal Douglas Perry? But he was now a she. How does that work in cases like this? In 2009, a shard of skin found under the fingernails of victim Kathy Brisbau as she'd scratched her attacker revealed a DNA profile nearly 2 decades after her murder. But there was no match to the DNA on the national database.
That gives us work to do, because we have a full male profile that is suspect now. So we can go around to all of these people, and the city detectives took 12 reference samples from possible suspects that had been suspects for a long time, couldn't really be eliminated, but wasn't enough to include them as suspects either. So they just kind of sat there. So they went around and took 12 samples, sent them out to the lab to be compared to this unknown male DNA.
Did they have a breakthrough? No.
They were all eliminated.
To get a DNA match, the former Douglas, now Donna Perry, had to commit a felony which would require her to yield DNA. Thus far, Perry had never given up his DNA. The case was about to be blown open. One Perry obsession had not completely deserted when he became she.
Donna Perry may have changed her outer being, still didn't change who she was on the inside, that fascination with firearms.
In 2012, 62-year-old woman Donna Perry is arrested by police for having firearms, which are illegal, and she's taken in.
On yet again, another federal firearms charge. But now it's 2012. DNA has really come to the forefront, and there's a federal requirement that once you're incarcerated, you have to provide a sample of your DNA.
So they take a sample from that person, which is a buccal swab, which amounts to swabbing, between the cheek and gum with essentially a Q-tip, putting it in a box and shipping it off and waiting for them to come back and say, yep, it's a match, or no, it's not.
The serial killer Douglas, now Donna, was about to be confronted with her crimes.
You see, Donna Perry thought she could change her outer look, but the way she is molecularly designed on the inside, that will never change, despite what may be going on. Her DNA does not change. As a result of providing a sample of her DNA, the detectives in Spokane are notified.
Marysville called me again and said, we got a hit in CODIS on a name of who this DNA matches. They said it was Donna, AKA Douglas Perry.
And as a detective, I would have looked at the results and saw Donna Perry and been, oh my gosh, we have a woman. We were looking for a man all these years. I would have been blown away by the name Donna Perry.
Dresbach and his colleagues felt that they had a strong case. A fingerprint found on a bottle in the dumpster after the murder of Nicky Lowe matched Donna Perry's.
There was the DNA evidence, there was the fingerprint evidence, there was the circumstantial evidence of seeing her with the prostitutes, there was the testimony of her cellmate from 1998 who said that she admitted to the crimes.
The officers read her the charges.
She was in the room by herself, and so then I just waited for a little bit. Then I went back in with this, and I read it to her, and when I read that the charge was murder, she said, murder? Murder? Who am I supposed to have murdered? Murder?
After all, Donna Perry hadn't murdered anybody.
Now, there were a couple other points during this interview that she said things that made it seem as if she was making a clear break between her personality as Donna and her past as Douglas. She said that she had gotten gender reassignment surgery to control her violent tendencies. She said that when, again, pressed, did you kill these women? Did you kill these women? Did you kill these women? She said no, but it was 20 years ago, and if Douglas did, I don't know.
This approach from Donna was a sign of a defense strategy to come. Investigators, even when they have significant scientific evidence, still like to get a confession.
What I wanted to do is I wanted to get her to acknowledge that she committed this crime.
An admission would not be forthcoming.
She's consistently reiterating that she didn't kill anyone, that Donna didn't kill anyone.
A colleague of Dresbach's gave Donna Perry enough rope to get what detectives felt that they needed, as he told her this.
We know that when people kill more than one person, it tends to continue on, and it goes on and on and on. What made this stop? Why did these stop? And that was really, it's a twofold question. One is to see if we'll get an indication that there were other victims that maybe we don't know about. Or two, to see if we can get an admission of some sort. Because she's still denying, no, I've never seen these people. And in this case, Perry said, well, Doug didn't stop it, Donna stopped it. That's as close to saying I did it as anything I've ever seen in an interview room.
22 years after the murder of 3 women whose bodies were abandoned by the riverside, Spokane police had their man. But would the woman he now was be found guilty?
I think what's really pathological about what Donna Perry does is she tries to scapegoat herself years earlier, tries to scapegoat the man she was for these murders. And she's very clear. She says, I did nothing as Donna Perry. I did nothing as this woman I am. It was all about this horrible man that I was.
Can somebody who identified themselves at one point in their life as a man now identify themselves as a woman and say, I'm changed, I haven't done those activities, and that's not me. Douglas Perry is dead. I am Donna Perry.
The jury unanimously rejected the Donna Perry defense. She was found guilty. Psychologist Linda Papadopoulos confirms the prevailing scientific view.
The extent to which this happens as a ploy, that she's just trying to rationalize this, trying to play the system, or if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe she believed so deeply that, this testosterone was, what was making her violent. It's a really sick way of conceptualizing it. There is absolutely no connection with gender dysphoria and psychopathic tendencies. There's absolutely none.
Donna Perry did not kill because she was transgender. Rather, Douglas Perry killed because he was a sadistic killer.
When you come down to the law, did Donna Perry, at the time that she was Douglas Perry, did she know the taking of life was wrong, was against the law? And clearly, it would be yes. Resoundingly, it would be yes.
No matter what gender Perry was, he was still guilty of being a serial killer.
I would think that the danger of Perry is that Perry doesn't look like what Perry is capable of. Perry looks like a meek, mild, doddering old woman, but it has potential that's far beyond what they look like.
And for seasoned detectives, the judge, jury, and law's attitude to those who claim innocence for the actions of a former self when a different gender came as a relief.
It sets a real precedent that she was ultimately incarcerated for these murders, because if that was the precedent, can you imagine the number of murderers who would suddenly, if they knew somebody was hot on their trail, would opt for a sex change operation somewhere?
Because I think she's kind of confusing what it means to have gender dysphoria. She didn't have, multiple personalities. This is somebody whose personality traits were consistent. What she did wasn't about how she felt about her gender. She did this because of how she felt about women, the anger, the violence that she had within her. And I think whether she was male or female is almost besides the point.
The mind of the serial killer Douglas Perry may well work differently now that she is Donna Perry. But Jim Dresbach doesn't care. Perry was a killer and could not hide behind his sex change operation.
You kill somebody, you're going to get caught. And I don't care if you go to the extent of changing your sex by surgery or not, or color your face or cut your hair, you're going to get caught.
It doesn't matter what the genitalia says. What matters in this case is what the DNA says. Donna Perry, Douglas Perry, they're one and the same. They are the killers.
Donna Perry, gun obsessive, transgender, and serial killer, was sentenced to life without parole.